We are finally beginning to dig into the actual book of James. It seems like we've been looking at his life for weeks now, and this week you should have been doing the lessons in your study book that correspond to James chapter 1. And so Carl and I are just going to discuss a little bit about what it was that stood out to us and what spoke to us. And Carl, why don't you start us off? What is it about James chapter 1 that seemed to really speak to your heart the most?
You know, what really hits home to me with my current situation, and be it, situation at work or at church or at home, whatever the challenges are, is there's always trials and troubles. And if you're not careful, they can really weigh you down, and you can really focus on them, and they can become, something that you can even makes you pessimistic. But it's so comforting to me, and it's so inspiring to me to remember, count it all joy. Count it all pure joy. Even amidst the hardest trials and troubles and pain you're going through, God's using it. He's developing your patience. He's developing your perseverance. And it's all going to be used for good.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's not always the easiest thing to do, though, because I know sometimes that we get sidetracked. Hearing you say that makes me think that I just read a post that went up on the Facebook Response to Grace study group page. It's a lot to say. For those of you who don't know, we have a page on Facebook that is solely devoted to study, and right now people are interacting there about the James study. And a post went up last night about the same subject, about counting it all joy, and the person who posted it said that he thought that joy came when we are totally convinced, and he used those words, totally convinced, that everything that happens to us, God is able to use it for our good, and turn it around and use it for his purpose. And several people have commented, under that post and shared their thoughts. And I know the first thing that popped into my head when I read that was I saw those words, totally convinced. And I commented and shared that, I know that. And a lot of times, though, I waver in the total part. Sometimes your heart or your head knows one thing, but living it and truly being convinced that it is going to work out and God is in the middle of this situation, sometimes that's really hard to do. And I think the devil knows that, and he uses that against us sometimes.
Sure. You think about some of the hardest trials, or maybe it's a prolonged difficulty that goes on, and maybe it's a very serious health concern. Maybe it's the loss of a loved one. A real impactful troubling situation. I think, like you said, Satan would love for us to turn away from God and say, why did God let that happen to me? But I think if we remember, this mortal life is so short. It's a blink of an eye in eternity. And if we think about how God uses every situation, good and bad, to mold us for his plans for us in eternity, it really can help us put things in perspective.
Absolutely. Talking about just any trial, and especially in trials that seem to go on and on, suddenly popped in my mind a study that I did years ago, but it had to do with the three Hebrew children and how they went through that fiery furnace. And the person that was teaching that study brought up that, God either saved them through the fire, or he was with them in the fire. There were several different outcomes that could have happened. And of course, they didn't know what was going to happen going into it. But the point that she made was that when they came out, because God actually, saved them from the fire, 3 different scenarios. He can save you with the fire, meaning he's going to take you on to heaven, or he can be with you through it and you walk through it. She said that what really stood out to her, and I remember that, was that they came out not even smelling like smoke. And so even though they had been in that awful situation, they obviously found joy because there was no residue of the nastiness of it. They didn't reek of it. They didn't have any evidence that they had gone through it other than the fact that God had sustained them. And I think that joy can kind of be like that. Whenever we rest in that state of being totally convinced, then all of the stuff that the devil wants to use against us, we walk away and we don't have that lingering, we don't have bitterness, we don't have strife and tension and all of those things that the devil wants to hand over to us and have us take and hold in our hands through that difficult time. When we rest in this knowledge that James is talking about, we basically take all the ammunition away from the enemy, and he has nothing at all to use against us.
Absolutely. And think about what it proclaims to God and the glory of God if if that trial or if that persecution is something you're doing because you're a Christian, because of what you're standing up for, because of who you're supporting. I mean, imagine that the pride that God has in his children when you face that persecution on his behalf.
Like he said about Job, consider my servant Job, because he knew. Yeah, that's true. One thing too that makes me think, you know, a lot of times as new believers, people who are young in their faith, I think they get this sense that if I live for God, everything's going to go smoothly for me because I'm going to give my life to him and he's going to lead me and guide me and direct me. But really the scriptures are pretty clear that if you live for him, expect. Just like, I mean, James says it's going to come.
Absolutely.
And we see in other places that we're going to experience it just because we're God's people and the devil is going to be battling against us.
Yeah, I think in what you say is absolutely correct. The easy road to go down probably isn't following, you know, the Christian faith, right? Because then you can just do what you wanted and do what the world tells you to do, and on you go. But when you think about how you want to develop yourself and the character you want to have, the integrity you want to have as a Christian and as a follower of God to prepare yourself for eternity, you know, I know where my heart is. I want to make sure I'm doing everything I can to step away from sin, or when I realize I've done it, you know, to pray for my forgiveness through Jesus, my Savior, and make sure the next time I face that same fork in the road, I take the right path.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. We want to thank you for being with us, and we want to encourage you today that if, you know, you do find yourself in situations like Carl said, whether that be at work or just life in general or family, whatever it is, that you ask God. Because you know what, we can't be totally convinced on our own. We really need him to renew our minds and to just encourage us every day. And I know that a past video that we talked about the importance of spending time in his presence. And really when you take that time to spend time with him every day, he does the convincing. And so we just want to encourage you to spend time with him and let him speak to your heart and just fill you with his presence and his spirit so that you can find joy in the midst of whatever it is that you're going through.